Hi, I'm Kristen O'Connor. For this project, I interviewed two people. The first is my husband V, who graduated from high school in 2005, and the second was my mom Sue Swansea, who graduated from high school. They went to the same high school, or at least my mom did for 1 year, and she graduated from the high school in 1968. So I hope you enjoy. Thanks for watching. Hi, this is my interview with V. O'Connor.
Hi.
I am Kristen O'Connor. So, where did you go to high school?
I went to Highline High School in Burien, Washington.
And what year did you graduate?
I graduated in 2005.
Okay. So, were there expectations in the educational system? Like, was there a lot of homework?
There was a fair amount of homework, but by the time I was in high school, it was kind of just known that you have assignments and you do them. You're given time in the classroom to be working on things, but whether you are needing extra time at home or you're fine tuning things, it was more at that point of high school that you knew what you were working on and how to accomplish that.
Was there a lot of computer-based assignments?
There wasn't a lot of computer specific based assignments, but there was a lot that required some research and tools that were easier to access through a computer, whether that's just word and spell check or whether that is actual research online, were different then than they are now.
So, were students issued a computer or a device of any kind?
No, we were not. We had access to computers in most of our classrooms, and there was student programs for internet at home if you didn't have it.
Okay. And did they have a lot of visual tools in the classroom? Did they have a lot of posters and things that would kind of help you in some of the work that they did, or was it mostly like memorization?
There was a lot of memorization to it and resources available in the classroom. More posters were very basic things or more motivational and to like set a mood in the room than they were to visualize things for you.
Okay. On that same note, did you guys do a lot of group work or collaborating with other classmates?
Subjects were kind of built around that sometimes. A lot of the chemistry, science labs were group work, and then you would individually summarize and let your findings be known. Then there were other classes where it was a lot more singular with group input from time to time, but not necessarily a full group assignment.
How were the classrooms set up? Were you guys in rows, like, row chairs in rows, or were you guys in groups? Or, I mean, maybe for science, huh?
High school was a lot more group rows of chairs than group settings. Group settings, there were tables that everybody kind of used in like the science classes and experimentation based programs. You were a little bit more groups with chairs. You each had a space on a table, but it was like 3 tables pushed together.
But like math or English would be a lot more independent, like you were saying.
Yeah.
Okay. What were the expectations of the business world in education? What do you feel like businesses were expecting students to learn or to accomplish in school?
There didn't seem to be a lot of correlation between businesses and the school curriculum. They were more kind of, here are basic functions. Things were, English classes were built around being able to string together sentences and paragraphs and present yourself, or a resume. Things like that were included, but it wasn't necessarily like how to write an invoice or things like that. It wasn't necessarily job training. but it was basis of how to accomplish business functions.
Were there a lot of like real world examples to kind of give purpose to some of that writing, or do you feel like it was just you have to do this, learn how to do this? I'm just curious what your thought was.
There was some real world examples in situations where we were writing resumes, or
So you did write resumes.
we did write resumes a little bit, but
Oh,
that was kind of the extent of writing for business purposes.
okay.
There were real life examples given. There were case studies that we took information from for things like that. But as far as examples, it
Or
was
real life
or real
problems.
life problems,
Okay.
that was a little more, that was a little less focal point.
And like just thinking about on that same kind of note, did a lot of students plan to go to work right after they graduated, or did a lot of students plan to go to a trade school or college? What do you feel like was the general consensus?
I didn't feel that in the classroom necessarily those things were discussed or
Hmm.
brought up. It wasn't necessarily that curriculum was based around what your future plan was. It was just kind of you were in classes that would be beneficial to your transcript. And those were more private conversations with guidance counselors and, yeah, pretty much guidance counselors, but the administration a little bit more. It wasn't necessarily public knowledge or classroom
People didn't talk about
catering
it.
to that.
What was your conversation with your guidance counselor like?
Um, I didn't have a lot of conversations with my guidance counselor other than base work and touching base on where we were, where I was in my classes and choices of classes. Um, I was not, the opportunity for college wasn't necessarily presented to me in a way that was going to be feasible through school. Um,
They didn't talk about scholarships or
Not really. We did some grant writing and some information of where to find things like that and information, but it wasn't necessarily a you should apply for these scholarships. You have the ability. It wasn't a reassuring or presented path necessarily as much. It was more the information had to be sought out by the student towards how do I get to this level, and it wasn't something that was very likely for me.
um kind of on that same note,
You
do
keep
you
saying
feel
that.
like I know what were the expectations of your parents for your education? What do you think they expected you to accomplish?
There wasn't a huge expectation or guidance from my parents towards what they wanted me to accomplish. I was not told that I should go to college or the benefits of going to college because my father hadn't done very much college and my mom didn't do more than a couple classes or a couple semesters in junior college, and my dad was more straight into a job with a family member when he graduated. So it wasn't a driven factor from my parents to further my education. Their expectations were pretty much go to school and don't fail. Um, graduate on time.
What do you think it means to be educated?
I think that that's a very complex question. There's a lot of education that can be given.
Mm-hmm.
I think there is a sense of being articulate. There is a sense of being knowledgeable and being book smart. There's also a sense of real world education or how to function in a job field or just how to accomplish things in the real world. And people that read a lot of books and are very book smart, if they don't have a purpose to it, can get lost. Um,
Can I ask a question? I don't mean to
yes.
interrupt. What do you feel like your school education gave you of the book smart or the world smart? Were either of those really addressed in your education, quote unquote, at school?
Um, they were. I feel like a lot of what I was taught in school and played a role of how to find information and where to look for things when you're wanting to improve or you're wanting to better yourself or you're being aware of a circumstance and using contextual data to acknowledge where that is and what those issues may be and how to accomplish them and to move past them.
Was there ever a point when there was a sign that they wanted to know what you were interested in?
Yes, there was a lot of kind of when you're picking classes at the beginning of the
Okay.
year or you're going for extracurricular activities or clubs, that there were a lot of conversations that and engagement from administration about around those topics, but not necessarily. I did not have math classes that were catered towards sports stats or
Yeah, yeah.
and there
That's
were,
that's sort of more what I'm meaning. Like it
yeah,
is,
and
yeah.
kind of the only thing that was near like journalism or a future career was being part of the yearbook. Like there
Mm,
was English class, and then you could kind of do interviewing and journalism type things with yearbook class.
mm-hmm.
So they weren't necessarily programs that were catered towards
What people were interested
personal
in. Okay,
interest. They
okay.
were more curriculum based.
Let's see. I'm kind of curious, like as far as the teaching goes, you were just mentioning math, and did they teach you how to do math in like multiple different ways, or did they teach you how to do something one way and then drilled it into you to do it that way?
Um, there were usually a couple options presented. Math specifically was this is kind of the procedure to solve these equations, but you can also use it this way as long as you're utilizing the tools you've already been taught
Okay.
to kind of solve that. You can solve it in different parts and then put them together. It wasn't necessarily there are three different ways to look at how to solve this problem. It
Okay.
was here's a couple ways and use your tools to figure out what's best for you to come to
Okay.
that answer.
Okay. That's
So there was a little bit of leniency and option based, but it was more these are your tools, use them how you will.
okay. Do you remember anything about the socioeconomic kind of levels and the ethnic makeup of your class?
We were we were pretty varied in our ethnicity levels. Um, we definitely had a lot of different cultural students. I think everybody's expectations for learning and class structure wasn't necessarily separate or different based on the ethnicity. It was kind of the same message was being given to everybody, and there were some accommodations for language barriers and things like that.
Okay. That's what my next question was, is like, were there people that spoke other languages or?
There were definitely some people that spoke other languages or translated for students who had English as a second language. They definitely had options. We still had handouts in both Spanish and English.
Okay.
That was kind of it. It was kind of limited at that point. I know there's a lot more languages being included in handouts these days. Um, and as far as like social climate range, that was just more social based in your friends and who you
No,
hung.
no, no, like
And
more like, did people come from rich families as well as poor families, or
yes,
oh, so it was
yeah,
mixed?
it
Okay.
was a pretty mixed range. We do have a couple private schools in the area that some students went to, but there was a lot of people that also just came to Highline. We had a very kind of rich cultural and diverse structure.
Okay. Were there any kids with like who had wheelchairs or anything in your class, or
There,
kids that were different?
high school, yes. We still had separate classrooms for
Kids who
extreme
have
special
disabilities.
needs
Okay.
classes.
Okay.
Their classroom was usually near the wheelchair ramp or close to where the elevator was for that. And they were highly supervised. But they did kind of have their own learning space. And then there were some subjects, electives, art classes, things like that,
Where you would
where
mix.
they were all in the same class. But as
Okay.
far as standard educational structures of like English, math, science, things like that, you didn't usually have the
Same
students
mix.
in the same classroom.
Okay. So you talked about having electives. What types of classes did you take?
Me, I took a lot of hands-on things. I took ceramics, I took art, I took home ec, I took auto body. It was a lot there. I felt like a lot of my regular classes were very structural and book and paper, computer in some of them. So that hands-on learning was more my speed for the electives. Lean towards those a little bit more theater class, things like that, where it was more varied learning opposed to
Just
just
sitting at a desk.
here's a book, read the book, write a report.
Did you have a favorite teacher?
Um, I had a couple really fun teachers. One of my teachers, one of the English classes in my senior year was actually a film appreciation class. So we basically got to watch movies and have group discussions about the movies and write papers on that. And she was a very comedic teacher in the way that she taught. But there was a reason you didn't get that class until senior year because it was not necessarily
The most academic.
the most academic English class, but it was more like an elective that was English credits. She was really fun. She was comedic. There were a couple other teachers that were willing to let you do work during your lunch break in their classroom. They were pretty fun. They were pretty lenient and not really strict. Yeah, favorite teachers were probably more elementary based teachers than high school teachers.
Okay. Well, that makes a lot of sense. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to do this interview with me today,
You're
V.
welcome.
Thank you. And thank you guys for watching.
Thanks.
So I'm here with my mom, Sue Swansea, and I'm going to interview her about her experience in high school. So which high school did you attend?
I went to Highline High School for just my senior year. I had gone to Huntsville High School in Huntsville, Alabama for the 3 prior years. But I went to school with kids that I had known in elementary school and middle school. So it seemed like a comfortable new experience.
Being at Highline or
Highline.
Okay.
Yeah. And
So
I graduated in 1968.
that was going to be my next question. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Just to compare those two experiences, was one a particularly small high school?
No, they were both large high schools, but I have to say that, in my opinion, the quality of education in Huntsville was much higher than what I received in Highline. And I think it's because that was a real kind of high-tech community. It was where Boeing had all its Saturn rocket engineers there. And I think that it was just a higher level of education, I think, due to pressure maybe from highly educated parents. I'm not
Interesting.
sure.
So it was different when you came here to Highline. It
was.
felt like it was less academically rigorous.
Right.
Could we
Yes.
say that?
Yes.
So did they give you homework?
Oh, yes. Yeah. I can't remember those details. This was a long time ago, you have to remember.
Okay.
But I do remember being very studious, very hardworking. So
Okay. And what was testing like? Did they do a lot of like standardized testing, or were assessments just in the classroom?
There was testing done. I think it was pretty traditional education from years ago, which is like you would read, you would listen to a lecture, and you would be tested on the material.
Okay.
I just remember that as being fairly standard. There wasn't a lot of time or anyway, you were not allowed to think
outside the box,
yeah,
creatively.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I was kind of curious, what were people really planning to do after school? Like, it sounded like Huntsville, there was these expectations from external businesses like Boeing and maybe
Yeah.
parents
Yeah.
involved in that, that kind of really made the academics more rigorous. Were there any business influences at Highline, or was it just a totally different thing?
I was there for only a year, so I'm really not aware of what the general thought about higher education was.
Okay.
My circle of friends all went to college.
Okay.
So, and I don't know, there were like 400 some people in my graduating class, and a lot of people that I didn't know. I don't know what happened to them.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really stay in contact with them, only with the people that I went on to college with, that I, know how they succeeded.
So for the people that were feeling that push to college, was that coming primarily from home? Were there guidance counselors at school that would promote that at all?
I don't remember any guidance counselors with giving advice for college education or college admissions like they have now. I don't even remember being aware of any other colleges except the University of Washington.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't even remember if I took the SAT test. I mean, that seems like something that may not even have existed back in that day.
Possibly not, right? Possibly not. It was definitely, it was a different time.
It was.
And so it sounds like your parents really were expecting you to go to college as well.
They were.
Right?
It wasn't a pressure sort of thing. I never assumed anything else than I would go to college. There was never a question. Nobody ever forced me anything. So
okay, cool. What do you think it means to be educated?
Oh, I think it means that you have a basis for everything you do in life. You learn to read, you learn to do basic mathematics, you learn about the natural world and how it operates. And I just think it means that you're given these foundations so that you can launch yourself into any sort of endeavor you want to.
So I would say today's curriculum is a lot more small group based. Did you guys work in groups at all or work collaboratively with classmates?
I don't remember doing that at all. But again, it was a long time ago. Okay. I just remember being in a very traditional classroom where, you were given material to read. There's a textbook.
Okay.
You were lectured on that material. You took notes. I don't think anybody on earth has taken as many notes as I have in such illegible handwriting. and then you were tested on the material. I don't remember anything. I don't remember necessarily even writing. I did write some papers, I guess, but not a lot. No visual things. I don't think I ever spoke. I didn't have to give any talks in class, I recall. It was very traditional. It was a very traditional kind of education.
So you were just lectured the whole time. There wasn't dialogue. There was not
there were probably opportunities to ask questions, to clarify things, but it wasn't I think it was pretty standard and traditional at that point in time.
It's interesting because nowadays it's a lot more like teachers ask a question and then leave it to the students to actually create the content of the conversation as well, which I think is really very different.
That's probably newer.
Yeah. Just like on that same note, what was the physical classroom setup like? Were you guys just in rows, everybody facing the lecturer?
As I recall, the teacher, the instructor was in the front of the classroom and you were sitting in desks. Mm-hmm. I don't think there was any kind of circle sort of thing. The only class, and this is one of the things that I'll talk about later when we get to that question, the only class that deviated from that was my advanced English class that I had. And that, I think we were just doing whatever we wanted to do, sitting on the desks or whatever. It was a very free kind of class. So that was the only one like that.
Yeah. Okay. So it sounds like a lot of this was like paper based, and of course, because nothing was digital back in your day, right?
No, there were no computers.
But what about like hands-on projects? From what I'm hearing, it's more like you listen, you read, you listen, you take notes, you get a test. But were there actually like
I don't remember
projects
that there were.
No. Okay.
There may have been, but I don't remember that at all.
Nothing stood out to you.
The only time where I had an opportunity for kind of free study was when I returned to Washington. I had to take a Washington history class.
Okay.
And so that I didn't have room in my schedule for that. Since I left early in the day, I substituted a PE requirement for my ballet classes.
Okay.
So I didn't have time to take the Washington history class. And so I was just given that as an independent study.
Okay.
All I did was read the book. I don't remember any tests at
No
all in
tests
that
at all.
area.
Okay.
But
Okay.
so don't ask me about Washington
No,
history.
that's okay. That's okay. For just thinking about your math classes, were they just teaching you one way to do things? Did they suggest or offer different options or different approaches to answering problems?
I don't remember that. I just remember probably going by the method in the book. I don't know that they offered other options
Okay.
unless the textbook offered them. I know the math wasn't that advanced.
Mm-hmm.
I wish that I'd been able to take calculus in high school,
Mm-hmm.
but I was only up to, I think it was math analysis was my class as a senior at Highline, and I don't even know what that math analysis
Maybe
amounted
statistics or
to.
something.
Yeah,
I'm not
I
sure.
don't know. Anyway, I
So
can survive. I can add and subtract.
and multiply and divide probably.
Yeah.
What was the socioeconomic atmosphere like? Were there a lot of like wealthy or poor or just a
I
mix?
think I was pretty oblivious to that. I had my own circle of friends. We were all about the same economically. We all lived in houses. We all had parents that worked.
Mm-hmm. Two parents that worked?
Two parents.
Okay.
I don't remember a lot of divorce situations
Or
when I was in
like
high school.
one parent working, the other being a stay-at-home mom was my, I mean,
Yeah.
not to say stay-at-home moms.
I don't know about that. I think in my circle of friends, mostly, well, one of my friends, I think the mother was a stay-at-home mom.
Okay.
And I don't know what her education level was, but mostly they were hardworking, middle-class people.
Would you say that
So-
most of your friends and your parents went to college? Did most of your
Right.
friends' parents also go to college?
I think
you
so, but
Okay.
this is not something you really quiz your friends about.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
I'm not
No,
too
I
sure.
understand. I understand. Well, that's okay. What about like other types of diversity? Looking at the
I
skin
think
color
there was
and-
little diversity in my
Okay.
class. If you look at, I have brought out in my yearbook for my senior year,
Yeah, I
and
noticed
I
that.
think they're all white people. I don't remember. I
Yeah.
do remember being exposed to diversity though. In my, I took ballet at Cornish School,
Mhm.
and that was what I did in place of PE for my senior year.
Mhm.
And there was at least one black girl in that class, and
Mhm.
I remember her name was Candace Brown, and she laughingly said that when they wrote it with her last name first, she became Brown Candace.
Okay.
Anyway, she was lovely. I don't remember any discrimination against her or anything, but we didn't have a lot of exposure to other races.
Yeah.
I don't remember any Spanish-speaking people. I don't remember
What about students
any
with
Asians
disabilities?
even in. I don't remember any students with disabilities. I remember seeing anyone in wheelchairs or anything. But again, I was only there for a year.
Mhm.
But even in Huntsville, when I went to high school there, I don't remember seeing much diversity.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
and I don't know why that was. Just the area of the town that the high school is located
Well, in
in.
the
maybe.
time, before
Yeah.
all of these structures were in place with the federal government to enforce schools
Right,
to allow
right,
people to be
right.
there. So let's see. How were the programs and classes structured? I mean, it sounds like I understand there's
Pretty
requirements.
traditional.
Okay.
Yeah.
Were there
I think,
electives?
I'm sure there were. I think
Okay.
you had to have a certain number of credits in the maths and sciences and English and things. But they had shop, they had
Okay.
home economics, and they had those sorts of things that were electives.
Okay.
I had taken my home economics in Huntsville, so I didn't have that here. And I
Were
took
girls
Alabama
allowed-
history in Alabama, and I had Washington history
In
here. That was a
Washington.
requirement
Yeah. Were,
to graduate.
were girls allowed to go to shop? I mean, was there any?
I don't know. I'm just
Okay.
not sure. None of my friends that were girls did go
Okay.
take shop, so
Okay.
I don't know.
All right. Thank you. Let's see. Just thinking about what kind of classes you took, I guess it really, you might have already answered this, but who was your most memorable teacher?
I was thinking about that last night, and actually, it was my advanced English teacher.
Yeah.
And at the time, until really last night, thinking about it, I thought he was my worst teacher because he never made us read like the classics like Dickens or To Kill a Mockingbird, all these things. So I missed out on reading all these literature works that were famous and most other kids had to read during English class. But because he assumed that we'd already read those, he had very high expectations for us, and I think it made us all feel like we were very exceptional in that class. And I think that's an important thing, that teachers
Hmm.
make children feel like they're important and they're capable of so much, and really respected. And I think that's what he did, and I never appreciated that at the time, but I do now.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's a good feeling to have.
Yeah.
Let's see. I'm thinking I've asked all the questions. Is there anything else you want to add about what being in school was like for you? Maybe comparing
Well,
Huntsville
I was
to.
a real hard worker, and I
Yeah.
think my opinion is that if kids really put an effort in and are motivated to do well, they will do well. Even though the teachers are bad, or the curriculum isn't, you know, wonderfully diverse, I think you will do well if you work hard. You have support from home.
Mm-hmm.
That's important. I
Mm-hmm.
remember having my dad help me with math problems, and my
Mm-hmm.
mom, actually, who only had a teacher's certificate, she went to a teacher's college, which is probably like a community college now. They didn't even have, I don't think they had community colleges when I went to college. Anyway, it was funny, she would help me with my homework. She would just suggest things, not that she knew the answer, but she knew how to suggest things so that I would discover the answer. And she was a teacher, so that was an excellent skill on her part.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So,
What do you think your motivation was for working so hard?
um, I don't know. It was just something built in me. Maybe it
Mm-hmm.
was my parents, very subtly. You know, I think they encouraged me a lot and made me think that I was a very smart and important person. And I think that a parent's role is important in the child's self-esteem. And I think if you have that self-esteem, you want to succeed and show the rest of the world what you've got. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you doing this interview. Thank you.
thank you.
I found this process to be extremely interesting. Interviewing my mom, who graduated in 1968, and my husband, who graduated in 2005, really gave me an interesting breadth of perspective and how things had changed. Um, I know that for my husband, certainly there was less of a college driven situation. For me personally, I actually did not go to private school or to public school. I went to a private school. And so that created a very different experience for me. Everyone was expected to go to college after high school, so there wasn't any question. A lot more similar, perhaps, to my mom's situation, and she also, of course, was part of my upbringing, and her upbringing seemed to be the large influence behind going to college. I feel like there was so much that happened in schools between my mom's year and my husband's years of going to school, including the passing of IDEA. Well, even prior to that, No Child Left Behind. And then the Every Student Succeeds Act, and all of those played an important role in what would become really the education of today. And when we consider what's important regarding culturally relevant teachings, certainly the UDL being more student oriented. And I feel like I asked both of my husband and my mom that question: how much did your interests matter in the way that you were taught or the material you were taught? And neither of them really felt that their interests were being represented by the academia. So I feel as though we've really let Dewey down in that we haven't had that much in our public school systems. Now, my private school experience was very interest based in that we had a lot more projects. We did a lot more. We had a lot more opportunities to choose what we would work on independently. We could choose different programs. We had what we called an experiential week, which was we would get to choose what type of activity we would do for an entire week. So I feel like there was more, somewhat more interest based learning. I also found that for me, my school curriculum was very heavily project based. And there wasn't as much small group work as I feel like there is even now at the current public school that I work at. But there was collaboration and group work in my school experience. I found that my mom certainly had less of that. I'm not sure desk orientation has changed much. I think it's interesting that even for my husband V, that the desks were only ever facing each other when they were in science. And admittedly, I'm working in elementary school, but even in a middle school, a lot more teachers are teaching in U shapes or four tables pushed together to create kind of a circle for of small group circles. And I certainly think that's something that's important, that needs to be part of any good education, is learning how to work with other people, learning how to work collaboratively. So knowing how my mom defined education is probably very similar to my own. And actually, I was shocked that my husband V's definition of education was actually also very similar, which is that an education is a foundation of information. I would disagree in that I don't think that math and like literacy are necessarily the foundation that we really, I mean, we definitely need it. That definitely helps us survive in the world. But I think education is so much more of a foundation in understanding who you are as a learner. That education is really about being able to, again, survive in the world. And that means more than just being able to solve math problems. It's working collaboratively together in a group to solve a math problem. It's, no job is just one person working alone. Every job certainly requires more and more of us to work as a team. It takes more than just one brain to create solutions to the real world problems that we're facing these days. So I think that education should definitely, if we're thinking of it being something that's going to provide for us moving forward in our lives and how to interact, is a huge part of that. And I appreciate that there's a lot more social emotional work that's being done in current public schools around supporting those needs and those kind of efforts to have kids work together. And yeah, so I feel like there's definitely still a sense that math and reading and writing are still very, very important and are not to be overlooked. At the same time, I see that there's definitely more of an emphasis on how we get that process done. And it's a lot more small group work. It's a lot more looking at kind of the students' interests and working with that and looking at how students learn and working with that to create an even more powerful result in student success. Something that I think was really interesting about what my mom was talking about with her favorite teacher, and what the environment that he created was so supersedes whatever his content could have been. The environment of holding kids up. And this was like an AP English class. He held kids to this incredibly high standard because he believed in them. And how that made her feel was that it was like the most inspirational class because it made her feel so good. And that even though she was disappointed they didn't read classics like Charles Dickens, that she felt like that was an incredible experience. And she was saying that even though previously she had thought this was her least favorite teacher, her least favorite class, after considering it more, she actually realized it was her favorite. Not because of the curriculum, not because of the content, but because of the way that she felt in that classroom. And that was the only class she had that had all the students not necessarily sitting in their desks facing a lecturer to be lectured, but actually having students standing, sitting, being themselves in that space, engaging in dialogue of a higher cognitive level because of what this teacher was really trying to get out of them. Was just so much richer. Like what he was targeting with them came from a place of higher thinking, of higher learning. And his expectations, of course, represented that. And I think that that's something that's really important when I consider the diversity of our schools and looking at, my own white background and privilege, and just being able to make sure that every student that's working with me also feels that have high expectations of them, that I believe in them and I value them. And I think that that's something that her saying that about her favorite teacher made me really think, well, that's definitely one of the more important aspects of being a teacher that I want to make sure that I imbibe, is that having high expectations of students is so necessary. And because I work in special education, it's even more necessary, because so frequently people encounter a student that has an IEP and they have much lower expectations of that student. But I think if we continue to help them see their best selves by first seeing it ourselves and then encouraging them to keep looking for it in themselves, that maybe we help them rise to the occasion and really achieve what they can achieve. So it was a really interesting experience to compare those two. I definitely have felt like I learned a lot in these interviews, and in considering my own experience being so different, in that I went to a private school and not a public school. And I think the only real big difference is that my class sizes were so much smaller. I mean, my mom's graduating class of 400 students, and my graduating class had 34. So that, I think, was the biggest difference. I don't remember what V said their graduating class size was, but I doubt it was 34. I bet it was more in the several hundreds. But it was a very cool experience to talk to them both about it. And I can see how things have changed, certainly between the late 60s, early 70s to the early 21st century. There has been a lot in that. Certainly less, I believe, is being lectured, though it still feels like that's very much this standard way of doing things. And I know there's more testing ever since, No Child Left Behind. Now we have these extra assessments that are happening throughout people's academic careers. And my mom questions whether or not she even took the SATs. I find that to be really interesting. And I know for my self personally, the SATs were something that everybody was going to take them, whether or not you were even thinking about college. And that was generally not something that people did, which is, you went to college, you were going to go to college, versus my husband, who I don't think ever took a SAT prep course or anything. It probably didn't take the PSATs. And even though they had a guidance counselor, it's not that they felt like that was really much support for them. Whereas my mom didn't have a guidance counselor, but she had parents that were really encouraging of her going to school. So it's really interesting. And I know that I share my mom's view that if a student has really dedicated parents who are willing to help their child put in the work, that they will succeed, even if teachers are terrible. And I don't think many kids have that access to those parents anymore, because so much is asked of parents. There's not a lot of extra time, I think, in parents' lives, to make sure, or to help their kids as much as they maybe should. And I know for some parents who have 2 or 3 jobs now, or have multiple kids, certainly that becomes less possible. Yeah. I one last thing that I'll share, just thinking about ethnic diversity in my mom's era compared to my husband's, that's another huge piece of change that really occurred with the Brown versus Board of Education, and something that it took a very long time for that to really take place. I mean, just knowing that Brown versus Board of Education, I want to say, was 1954, and my mom graduating in 1968, and her class still being entirely white. I'm not sure that was so much segregation as it was just the neighborhood schools, but it just goes to show that even 20, not quite 20 years later, not quite 20, but a decade plus later, there is still not a lot of diversity in her school. And, in my husband's graduating class, there was a lot more diversity. And what creates that? Is it just having different housing, or just, it being a bigger city, Seattle growing, and we just start drawing different people? I don't know. Was it, the movement to really, encourage schools to make themselves available to people who speak different languages? What came first? Was it the availability, the access? Was it the growing of a city. I'm not sure. So, but I do think that it was interesting to talk about special education again. And now we're in this next phase of special education becoming incorporated into general education, meaning that there's fewer and fewer schools that are creating these separate classrooms, these self-contained classrooms for students of different abilities. And now those students are being pushed into the mainstream classrooms with the support that they need to be successful in those general education classrooms. And I myself have seen students that were, previously in a self-contained room, like an independent learning center, now being more in a general education room, and how much they're just absorbing in proximity to their classmates. And I think about Coleman's research in our last chapters of our book, and how he noticed that students who were surrounded by peers of higher thinking were more likely to also have higher thinking. Just like my mom, all of her friends were going to college. There wasn't even a question. Being surrounded by people who are intending to go to college got them to college. And I think being surrounded by peers, the students of differing abilities certainly rise to the occasion, and are more likely to find that success. So I really believe in this movement that the school district is taking in my area. So thank you for watching, for listening. I really enjoyed the learning, and have a wonderful day. Thanks so much.